zombie apocalypse hit. I was living the dream in my hometown with my dog and cat. Before my rebirth, I was just another corporate drone fresh out of college. My parents passed away shortly after I was born, so Grandpa Arthur and I only had each other. Luckily, the inheritance they left me was enough to last my previous lifetime, though I had squandered it all hiding at home. Holding my debit card, I quickly jotted down a list of supplies. Years of reading zombie novels were finally paying off. I set aside a chunk of cash for home fortifications and dumped the rest into food and water. Grandpa's place was a 3-story house in a rural town outside Seattle, complete with a vegetable garden. It was renovated a decade ago, and the whole property was surrounded by high walls. At the end of the yard, Grandpa had built 2 small sheds for raising chickens and ducks. He was tough as nails, always acting like he was still in his 20s. He loved the peace of the country and absolutely refused to live with me in the city. First, I called Grandpa. Explaining the zombie situation would be too complicated. I played it mysterious, telling him that Facebook was blowing up about a new virus worse than the worst flu strain, and told him to stock up on our favorite snacks. Grandpa was thrilled. The last pandemic had caught him off guard, and he was ready to show off his prepping skills this time. I checked the calendar. Exactly 3 days until the outbreak. Perfect. I opened a delivery app and ordered a mountain of MREs, canned goods, ramen, and daily necessities from nearby warehouse clubs like Costco, scheduling them for staggered deliveries. I maxed out my HSA card on emergency meds and threw in some first aid kits. When the deliveries arrived, I drove to the local mall and bought several solar panel kits and high-capacity power banks. I only stopped when I figured we had enough, loading everything into my rented cargo van. I also picked up some hunting knives, baseball bats, and grabbed a slingshot on a whim. I used to play with them as a kid, never expecting it to save my life now. I drove the food and meds home. The second batch of rice, flour, cooking oil, and cleaning supplies arrived shortly after. I took inventory. We had enough to last 2 people for 3 to 5 years. It was only 6 in the evening. Half a day had passed, and I still had plenty of money left in my account. I figured the cash would be useless soon, so I converted it all into gold coins. Once the zombie crisis blew over, I would be rich. Yes, in my previous life, it was a zombie outbreak. About 6 months into the apocalypse, survivor bases started popping up. I was just a keyboard warrior back then. I managed to trek to the nearest base with some kind neighbors, seeking asylum. Just as we reached the gates, a gang of raiders ambushed us. They wielded machetes smeared with infected blood and charged in while the gates were open. They injured dozens of residents before the guards finally shot them down. I stood there with my eyes wide open, mere steps from safety, and was gunned down right outside the gate. I have no idea what happened after that. The government actually moved fast. They stabilized the situation within 6 months. Grandpa and I just needed to survive the first year until the military cleared the outer zones. But it was better to be safe than sorry, so I bought even more supplies. I called Grandpa, told him I picked up some things, and asked him to wait up for me. I started the drive back to the country. I had rented the van for 3 days. The house was far from downtown Seattle. I finally pulled into the driveway at 10 o'clock. Grandpa rushed out, took one look at the packed van, and his jaw dropped. He said I didn't need to buy the whole store, as this was enough to feed us for years. It was getting late. I locked the van and pulled Grandpa inside. Making up excuses was giving me a headache, and I needed him to understand the gravity of the situation. I decided to come clean. Grandpa was a smart man. He knew I wasn't the most capable guy, but I wouldn't buy all this random survival gear for no reason. It didn't look like a weekend visit. It looked like I was running for my life. I explained everything to him, only leaving out the part about me being reborn. 3 days until the first zombie appeared in my previous life. The next morning, I jumped out of bed and started organizing the stash. I had hired contractors to reinforce the house, and the job would take at least 2 days. Grandpa hadn't seen me move this fast in years. He watched with pure amusement. He directed me to put the snacks on the 2nd floor, the meat in the chest freezer, and cover the rest with a tarp for the 3rd floor. He joked that I couldn't possibly expect an old man with 1 foot in the grave to do the heavy lifting. When the contractors arrived at 2 in the afternoon, I collapsed on the couch while Grandpa played supervisor. That evening, I brought the crew some food and beers, encouraging them to work faster and finish by tomorrow. I checked the weather. The sky was incredibly gloomy, looking like a massive storm was brewing. The trees around the house had grown wild, with branches reaching right over the front gate. Frowning, I grabbed a machete and headed outside. The branches left a few scratches on my arms, but I managed to clear them all out. The next day, the contractors finished the installations. I hooked up the pre-bought electrified wire mesh and ran it along the perimeter of the yard. It would have looked completely paranoid to put it up on the walls right now, but I didn't care. With everything set, I did a final inventory check. We weren't missing a single thing. That night, I drove the van and took Grandpa to the biggest steakhouse in the neighboring county. We ordered massive ribeyes and loaded baked potatoes. The hot steam rose and clouded my vision. I took a bite of the juicy steak, followed by a sip of ice-cold soda, grinning from ear to ear while Grandpa chuckled at me. He ordered a glass of bourbon and toasted with me. We both broke a sweat from the hearty meal. Before leaving, I took one last look back. The brightly lit restaurant and the lively crowd felt worlds apart from the quiet, empty streets outside. We weren't in a rush to go home. I drove us down to the Snoqualmie River. The van had some folding camp chairs left by the owner. We sat by the water, taking slow sips of our drinks in comfortable silence. We just sat there. The city lights across the river painted the sky a dull gray. There were no train horns, only the sound of crickets. We soaked in the peace of this final night. The temperature was so perfect it made me want to fall asleep right there. Grandpa eventually nudged me awake. Dawn was breaking. It was time to go. October 1st, the first day of the outbreak. I was jolted awake at noon by a flood of phone notifications. I had never seen so many breaking news alerts in red text. Suspected zombie outbreak. People biting each other in the streets. The country declared a state of emergency, initiating a Tier 1 response and locking down over a dozen infected cities. Twitter was a war zone. Videos went viral showing normal people walking down the street suddenly lunging at bystanders. My phone kept buzzing, sending my anxiety through the roof. The zombies from my previous life were here. At first, the National Guard tried to maintain order, but the virus spread faster than anyone anticipated. The police force was completely overwhelmed. It was inevitable. Modern transportation meant the virus easily hitched a ride on planes and trains to every corner of the country. Even with the experience of past pandemics, the government was caught off guard. It was like a ticking time bomb detonating everywhere at once. Some called it an act of God, a punishment for destroying nature. Others claimed it was a leaked bioweapon from a secret foreign lab. A few conspiracy theorists swore it was a population control purge. Cities fell one by one. The screams echoed through the downtown streets for days. I sat on the couch, watching Grandpa's hands tremble slightly. The visual shock was just too much. The news showed creatures with pale, grayish skin and dark, coagulated blood. The foul stench from my past life felt like it was right there in the room with me. Grandpa smacked the back of my head gently. He told me to relax, reminding me that I said the military would restore order soon and that this was only temporary. He boasted that he had lived a long time and seen it all, so this was nothing. I sniffled, looking up at his glowing, confident face. I asked him why he was calling me kiddo like some old-school cowboy. Initially, the government urged everyone to shelter in place and trust the process. But rebuilding a shattered police force took time, and people quickly ran out of pantry staples. Nobody really hoarded food anymore. For the first month, I watched people on the internet encourage each other and share rationing tips, fully believing the army would arrive any day. But a month later, the cities lost their maintenance crews. The water and power grids failed. The peaceful vibe vanished. The internet turned into a toxic wasteland. People blamed everyone and everything. One minute they were furious and wanted to fight the zombies to the death. The next they were crying about being born in the wrong era. Grandpa and I stayed cozy in our little fortress, watching the trending topics drop off one by one until the feeds just wouldn't refresh. The final nationwide broadcast before the blackout stated that the military was building safe zones in Montana. They urged citizens to evacuate north if they could do so safely. I remembered this well. People were starving, and this evacuation order gave them false hope. It was too rushed. Most people didn't have the stamina to fight through the hordes. Many just ended up as zombie food. Our rural town didn't have many residents to begin with. A month into the apocalypse, the few locals had already locked themselves indoors. There were only a few stray zombies wandering the main road outside our village. Grandpa saw the reality of the situation. It had only been a month. Heading to Montana meant passing through major cities and highways crawling with the infected. There was nowhere to hide. Traveling now was a death sentence, especially since we still didn't fully understand how the virus mutated. The crops in our garden, combined with our stockpile, could easily last us 7 or 8 years. We decided to just enjoy this off-the-grid cabin life. After breakfast, I grabbed Grandpa's binoculars and crouched on the roof, looking toward Seattle. A few infected still roamed the highway. Distant explosions echoed from the city skyline. My curiosity was killing me. I really wanted to know what was happening downtown. About a week after the outbreak, I saw people in my old apartment complex's Facebook group begging for food. They shared rumors and warned the older folks not to fight the infected head-on. At first, people rationed their pantries and took it day by day. But when the hunger set in, humanity went out the window. The group chat eventually went dead. Now, a month later, I noticed the zombies were moving slower. They had no food source, and the Washington weather was getting freezing. I hoped the winter would wipe them out. I put the binoculars away, rubbed my freezing hands together, and hurried downstairs to slide under the heated blankets Grandpa had just warmed up by the fireplace. Felt exactly like being a kid again. Life in the country meant we didn't have to worry about starving. The first month was a breeze. I just made it a habit to track the zombie movements every day. We needed to finish the fresh meat we bought, so I suggested we make a classic beef pot roast. Grandpa agreed and quickly blanched and chopped the thawed beef. Cooking on a wood-burning stove was a hassle, but the food always tasted incredible. He seared the meat, tossed in rosemary, thyme, and beef broth, letting the rich flavors soak into every piece. He garnished it with some fresh parsley and called me over for dinner. The pot roast was dangerously good. I ate 2 massive plates and could barely stand up straight. The beef was tender, savory, and packed with flavor. A deep sense of happiness and satisfaction washed over me. As I ate, a couple of tears actually rolled down my face. A peaceful life was such a luxury now. Our neighbor, Mrs. Miller, occasionally traded her homegrown vegetables for our supplies. Her son Mark was trapped in Seattle. He had called her right before the cell towers went down, telling her to stay safe and lock her doors. Mrs. Miller lived closest to us. She had probably guessed what we were up to during our frantic prep week and had locked down early. Older folks always liked to be prepared. She didn't buy much, but with her garden, she had more than enough for one person. She told me it was good I came back to keep Grandpa company, saying it gets hard being alone at that age. She wondered out loud when this terrifying virus would finally end. I gave her a reassuring smile and told her not to worry. I said the government would figure it out, and as long as we stayed put and didn't run around, we were doing our part. Mrs. Miller had watched me grow up. She used to babysit me. The stress of worrying about Mark had given her a lot more gray hair this past month, and she had lost weight. Whenever we cooked something special, we always brought her a large portion. Cooking for one was a pain anyway, so we just made extra. I told her to take care of herself, reminding her that Mark was waiting to take her to the city to enjoy life once this was over. Hearing that, the worry lines on her forehead softened, and she gave me a warm smile. Grandpa spent 2 days fixing his old ham radio. Finally worked. Static filled the room, but the usual stations were dead silent. Grandpa refused to give up, tuning his precious radio whenever he had free time. I slept in every day, then went up to the roof with my binoculars to take notes. Back when I was working, I felt like a walking corpse. Now that I had all this free time, I could actually control my own life. At first, I binge-watched the movies and shows I had downloaded to my laptop. but after a while I had memorized all the dialogue. Grandpa took me into his garage, his personal treasure trove. He loved modern gadgets but couldn't let go of his antiques. I found the slingshot he used in his youth and couldn't put it down, though I couldn't hit a single target. I asked him to teach me. Grandpa proudly showed off his skills. It was his childhood toy and muscle memory kicked right in. I still couldn't hit anything, but it was perfect for playing fetch with Buster. Ever since Buster got locked in the yard, he would sprint laps around the property to burn off energy. He would dig up random junk from the corners of the yard and bring it to me, wagging his tail in circles. I knew he was bored out of his mind. I used the slingshot to launch a tennis ball, and Buster would happily sprint after it. Luna just sat nearby, licking her paws and judging us. Playing fetch was tiring. When I stopped, Buster would just run circles around Luna, following her everywhere. Mrs. Miller came over with a basket of fresh apples. Before leaving, she told me Mark had managed to send a brief text. He said they had enough food but couldn't leave the city yet. He also mentioned hearing loud pops that sounded like gunfire. He wasn't sure, but he warned her not to go outside and not to show mercy to strangers. I was shocked it was happening this fast. I thanked her and watched her walk back. I went inside to check for any new radio updates. I hadn't realized civilian scavenger gangs were already forming. They usually started by looting small convenience stores on the outskirts before moving to the massive warehouse clubs and malls downtown. The zombie hordes were too dense. Even with guns, one wrong step meant death. So, residential areas became their prime targets. They would kick down doors block by block. If you complied, they took your house and your supplies. If you resisted, they killed you. 2 months into the apocalypse, with no laws or order, the darkest parts of human nature were on full display. They wanted slaves, not extra mouths to feed. The zombies in the distance seemed to catch our scent over the next few days, slowly shambling closer to our property. My slingshot skills had actually improved. I picked out a few smooth stones, found a comfortable spot on the roof, and aimed at a zombie's head. I missed. I adjusted and aimed for its leg. Thwack! It dropped to its knees and face planted into the dirt. One afternoon, after a fantastic lunch, I was lounging in a rocking chair, soaking up the sun and petting Buster. Suddenly, frantic pounding echoed from the front gate. Help! Please! Help! Is anyone there? I grabbed a steel crowbar and crept toward the gate. Grandpa stood on the other side of the door, signaling me to check it out first. I stepped onto a notch in the wall and peeked over. It was a college-aged guy holding a little girl who looked about 5 or 6.